Welcome to The Forest Garden, a podcast for gardeners who want to upgrade their landscapes into biodiverse food forest systems. On today's episode of The Forest Garden, we are delving into the world of passion fruit. Passiflora is a genus of about 550 species of perennial climbing vines. So we certainly can't cover all of them in this episode. Today we'll be covering just a few species that Ben and I have personal experience cultivating, processing, and of course, consuming. The species we cover today will run the gamut from chilly zone 6 all the way to tropical zone 11, so there should be something for everybody in today's episode. Stick with us. Hey there, podcast listeners. Today we have another In the Field episode for you. I'm recording live from my brother's food forest in Pololo Valley on the island of Oahu in Hawaii. He has a very extensive and diverse food forest that was already sort of pre-established when he bought the property. And there was also quite a bit of eucalyptus here, which is technically an invasive species, that he thinned out the canopy of the eucalyptus, freeing up a lot of room in the understory for plantings of citrus and other young tree crops sourced from local organic permaculture nurseries. I'm currently looking up at a lychee tree that is one of the major dominant overstory trees in the landscape. But today's episode isn't going to be around tropical permaculture as an idea or as a concept. If you're interested in tropical permaculture in general, you could check back to our episode last season where I interviewed Adam Crow, who just so happens to be my brother-in-law, who lives in Papa'aloa, Hawaii on the Big Island, which I will also be visiting in about a week. But anyways, today's episode is on Passiflora, the genus. There's more than one passion fruit or Passiflora species out there, which some of you may be familiar with or not, depending on where you live. On the East Coast, where I hail from, in Zone 6, there's a species called Passiflora incarnata. Now, a few years ago, Ben put together a video where he made a tincture from the flowers of Passiflora incarnata. So we're going to just jump to that for a sec before we get back to the greater conversation about the Passiflora genus.
What's going on, everybody? We're going to do a passion flower extract, fermented passion flower extract. The first step is to collect your passion flowers. These are some beautiful passion flowers. It's uncertain if this is like the regular Maypop variety. I believe it is, but this was not found wild in Tennessee, and it's actually Tennessee's wildflower is the Maypop. It's middle of August here. You can collect them anytime, and don't worry, the plant will grows new. You can see ones coming up there. It grows new ones every single day. So if I collect all these, come tomorrow or the day after, there'll be a ton more flowers on it, so you're not really affecting anything. So I collected a bunch of passion flowers, probably have like a dozen here, and you just want to make sure there's no bugs or dirt on them. And then I filled up a mason jar about halfway. And I'm just going to place them one by one, just right in there. And this idea came as an accident a couple years back. I don't know why I put these in water. I think I was going to try to make some kind of like extract from them later on, but I ended up just doing water instead of alcohol, and then I forgot about it, and then I came back to it, and the purple color had like leached out into the water, and then also it fermented almost like a pickle. And so I created this kind of like water kefir type of beverage. So I'm going to try to do that, and this is a lot more concentrated than I did last time. I probably only had like one, maybe two in the glass jar, and so this is probably about a dozen. So I'm like really packing them in there. So if there's any bugs in there, that would definitely cause problems, but it looks pretty cool. And we'll check back in a couple weeks, maybe a little bit longer, and see how this is doing. Okay, it's been just over a month, and we're going to check in on our passion flower extract. And as you can see, it's this dark, beautiful purple color. I know it's kind of maybe hard to tell, but it's really vibrant color. It's really cool. And at this point, you can probably remove flowers because they've actually been stripped of their color. And even though there might be more medicinal compounds in there, for what we're doing, it's ready to open and actually consume or store. So I have a little tea strainer here that I'm putting in this wide mouth mason jar. Basically just hold the flower and pour that beautiful purple liquid right in. I'm try to get all of it as much as I can. I may go back and kind of squeeze some of the rest of that out and make sure I get all of it. What's really cool is like this stuff lasts a long time and it keeps its color. I did this last year. What's interesting though is that the flavor of this, if I were to take a sip, it actually has a pickly taste. I didn't use any salt or any sort of starter culture, but it has a pickly taste because I'm basically fermenting the passion flower. But I'm also getting all those medicinal compounds. I didn't know how powerful passion flower was until just yesterday when I actually took a sip of this stuff. And then an hour later, I felt, maybe it's placebo because that happens, but an hour later, I felt like so relaxed, like more than I've ever felt in a long time. And it wasn't so much like a low energy relaxation. It was just kind of like everything was all right. So I'm going to keep experimenting and seeing if it continues to have that effect. And it probably, like I said, it's fermented, so it might have some probiotic benefits too. This is really cool. I've never seen this before as a beverage, but it's actually really, really cool and beautiful too.
Sounds delicious. I probably have those Passiflora incarnata vines popping up back home in New England right now, although I'm not there to see them. But I've yet to actually make the tincture situation, so I'm really excited to do that. Ben really inspired me when we first talked about his experience doing this. Out here, we might be making some pickled mango in the next few days, so pickled Passiflora sounds equally exciting. Before we jump into taste testing some of the more tropical species of Passiflora that are growing all over the place in the area that I'm recording in, Ben has some additional notes about his experiences growing Passiflora in Tennessee and Missouri, and he grew them for a few more years than I have. So yeah, let's just dive in and listen.
Hey everybody, what's going on? Ben here. Today we're going to talk about Passiflora. It's one of my favorite genera. It's a group of vining species that grow in the tropics, the subtropics, and even into hardiness zone 5. So there's something for almost everybody. There's, of course, like I said, many different species. So if you're consuming anything other than Passiflora incarnata, the Maypop, or Passiflora edulis, which is the common passion fruit, you want to look into it and see what you're working with. But they're a really gorgeous group of plants. One of my favorite flowers. The flowers they're just knockout. But anyway, so the tip for growing passion flower, give it space. It's one of the fastest growing vines that I've come across, that I've grown in my garden. And especially if you give it a couple years to really ramp up and lots of sun and lots of water or rain, it can grow just amazingly fast and can completely cover a chain link fence 40 feet, 50 feet down. And so you don't want to put it anywhere that you don't mind getting covered, especially as the years go on. But you can, of course, manage it. It's relatively easy to clip back. But if you want to grow it and you really want to get a lot of flowers, a lot of fruit, a lot of foliage, give it a trellis, not just a little tomato cage sized trellis. Give it a really large, object to grow on. And the easiest way to do that is to plant it near something that already exists on the landscape. And if you have an established tree, that could work. Although if it's in the shade of a tree, it's gonna grow a little bit slower. So if you have something that maybe even a dead tree, that might be perfect for passion flower to grow on. Or like I said, a chain link fence or a trellis if you have one. And then the second tip that I have is to use all the parts. So when I first grew passion flower, the only reason why I grew it was because I wanted passion fruit. But then I really fell in love with the flowers. To me, they're hypnotizing. And there's so many different things I could talk about when it comes to why I like the plant. But even with the flowers, not only are they beautiful, but you get tons of them. You could harvest them, you could pick them every day, and then the next day there's just going to be more. So that it really doesn't quit. And at least the variety I was growing, the Incarnata by Sinicata hybrid incense passion flower, it would just from spring to fall just be flowering profusely. And so anytime I went out in my garden, I got to enjoy the flowers. And of course the bumblebees really loved the flowers as well. It was one of their favorites in the garden that I had back in Tennessee, and they'd actually fall asleep on the flowers. And I don't know if exactly why they fall asleep on that plant in particular, but I've feeling it has something to do with the next point, which is the foliage of the passion vine, passion flower, however you want to call it, is an anti-anxiety natural remedy. It has an ingredient, it has compounds in it, but that have been recognized as anti-anxiety compounds in plants. I mean, there's plenty of other herbs like valerian or skullcap that have kind of relaxation properties to them, but I don't know if any of them have actually been recognized. But apparently the ones in passion flower are very similar to benzodiazepines. But whenever I take the passion flower extract from the flowers or from the leaves, I just get a pretty nice sense of well-being. It helps me sleep, helps me relax. I don't do many herbal remedies, but I have a big jug of passion flower extract. I did an alcohol and water extract, which is a little bit different from the video that I have on a water extract, but they both work pretty similarly. But the alcohol extract is going to last quite a bit longer. And then finally, the fruit. I guess I'll just kind of go into my experience growing them. The hybrid, the incense hybrid with the purple flowers in Tennessee, unfortunately, I never really got much fruit off that variety. It would flower profusely, and a couple of those flowers would pollinate, but the fruit would never ripen, even in late into October, November. It just sort of sat on the vine and never produced anything. Meanwhile, the wild Maypop species, the Passiflora incarnata, produced lots of fruit, and it flowered just about the same in terms of timing. Maybe didn't flower quite as many flowers, and they weren't quite as beautiful as the incense hybrid that I was growing. But the wild ones in the area produced a lot more fruit, sweet, very flavorful, good quality,
and absolutely delicious in jams or jellies. In the Southeast, I guess, there's quite a bit of those. So thank you, Ben, for such an incredible Passiflora incarnata deep dive. From this point on of the episode, we're going to dive into some of the other Passiflora species that are much more common in the tropical zones. If you are someone who's a listener of this podcast and you're a little bummed out by how frequently we talk about cold, hardy climates and things in zone 6, zone 7, zone 5, well, now's your time to shine. We're covering Passiflora, and we're not covering every species of Passiflora, but we're going to talk about a few that are some of the most common species, like Passiflora edulis, which is a tropical species that is very prevalent out here in Hawaii, where I'm recording this episode. I don't know if you guys can hear all of the different bugs and birds in the background of the food forest that I'm standing in recording this, but there's quite a few. And yeah, the Passiflora edulis is the most common Passiflora species out here, but it's a little confusing because there's different varieties within the species. So Passiflora edulis has a purple Liliko'i. Sorry, Liliko'i is the Hawaiian name for passion fruit. So there's a purple passion fruit, and then there's also a yellow common passion fruit. But then there's also a yellow passion fruit that's in Hawaii and in many other tropical zones that is an entirely different species. And the way to tell that apart is really by the rind. So the Passiflora edulis has this very circular form with a hard rind, and the yellow common passion fruit of the species of Passiflora edulis is kind of tart. It's not super, super sought after. It has, there's still cultivars of it, but even the cultivars sometimes have a little bit of a tart taste to the point that people don't totally love it, or some people love it. I mean, I can't speak for everybody. Passiflora is a very loved genus, and every species within the genus, I mean, there's dozens of hybrids out there. There's Passiflora caerulea or caerulea back in the home stretch of New England that you can grow that has poisonous leaves and poisonous flowers, but beautiful flowers. It's more of an ornamental, and theoretically you can eat the fruits that species creates, but really it's more of an ornamental Passiflora. And all over the place there's Passiflora species that are ornamental. We're really not going to dive into every single Passiflora species to cover, but for this episode we're really going to just talk about some of the more common edible kinds that you can find in the tropics and on the East Coast. For the East Coast, Passiflora incarnata really is the go-to. And Ben, you did such an amazing job running down everything about the species that is so fantastic. It's really amazing how you can eat not only the fruit, but the leaves and the flowers. Personally, I've had the flowers in salads, and I'm excited to pickle them and make medicinal sort of relaxation drinks out of them. I have yet to do that, and I'm very excited. I heard about a couple down in Kentucky that are doing sort of a 10-year plus selection project where they are selecting for the best, largest, most tastiest fruits of Passiflora incarnata, where you get the flowers and you get the leaves as edible, amazing, delicious salad greens, but you also get really big, really tasty fruits. And sometimes that's not always true of the Passiflora incarnata species, Sometimes the fruits aren't super tasty. But anyways, I'm getting way off track here. Let's get back to the tropical stuff. So back to Passiflora edulis. Out here in Hawaii, it's a species that is grown all over the place. It grows wild. You'll be walking through the jungle and you'll see some Liliko'i hanging above you or some passion fruit hanging above you. And more often than not, it's Passiflora edulis, and it's the common yellow passion fruit. But sometimes it's the Jamaican Liliko'i, which is Passiflora laurifolia. And that's the one that everyone seems to really like out here because it's like really sweet. It doesn't have any tart flavors. It just overall, it's always going to give you this amazing flavor experience. The experience of biting into a purple Passiflora edulis with that like magenta rind, and it's more circular, it's not as oblong, and the rind is a little bit thicker. Yeah, I don't know. That was my first experience, and just biting into it and sucking out all those seeds, and there's just like this aroma. There's this beautiful aroma, this perfume that erupts into it just totally encapsulates the experience. I feel like there's something really special about both species. So we're going to do a taste test and figure out exactly, we're just going to get to the bottom of this thing and maybe investigate it a little bit further. So the most common two species on the islands out here are Passiflora edulis and Passiflora laurifolia, the latter being the Jamaican Liliko'i, which everybody seems to think is the better of the two. I have both of them right here, and I was going to do a little taste test. The first time I ever got exposed to Liliko'i was in Hawaii when I was about 10 or 11 years old. And I kind of fell in love with this tropical passion fruit. It just kind of blew my mind that such a thing existed, coming from living in the East Coast where I didn't think we had anything like that, but little did I know we did. And now I grow it at home. So, okay, so here we go. The first that we're gonna dive into is the species, the Jamaican Liliko'i, that everyone seems to think is the tastiest and the sweetest of the Liliko'i out here. So yeah, it's very sweet. It doesn't have any real tart notes to it. The thing about Liliko'i is that you don't eat the skin. You take a bite into the skin and then you just suck out the seeds inside, and the seeds are coated with this very flavorful sort of gelatinous coating. And then you just swallow the seeds. You don't chew them. It's kind of an unusual eating experience for those of you who maybe have never had passion fruit before. Okay, now let's just try the Passiflora edulis now. So yeah, a little bit more tart. Kind of has the more standard flavor of what you would expect. The flavor's like a little bit more complex, I guess, in terms of and it has a more distinct aroma. If you ever get a Passiflora drink out here in Hawaii, I feel like this is what the flavor is. Like, this is what the flavor that they took and they transformed into beverages and different tasty treats. Or if you ever have Liliko'i butter, it's a more complex flavor. I feel like I like the edulis better. And once again, the difference is that the edulis is like a little bit bigger. It's purple or magenta, kind of red, with little spots all over it, little sort of white-ish, grayish spots all along. And then the Jamaican Liliko'i is just this orange or yellow. The one I'm holding is rather orange, but usually I feel like they're called like yellow passion fruit. That one doesn't have any spots, and it's smaller and a little bit sweeter. But I don't know, I feel like I like the one that is the more common one better of the two. And comparing these to the species that I grow back home, I feel like the the flavor of Passiflora incarnata is just a lot more subdued, and the fruit is considerably, is half the size of Passiflora edulis, and about 2/3 of the size of the Jamaican Liliko'i. And then these aren't the only species that are available on island or in tropical climates. If you are in southern Florida, I'm sure there's dozens of species of Passiflora out there, more than dozens. There's a lot, and most of them have edible fruit. Not all of them have edible leaves or edible flowers, though, so you have to be careful. In any case, they're such a beautiful species. Flowers will attract bees, and they'll kind of conk out on your flowers, getting nectar drunk, which is pretty fun to watch. You can pet bees on your Passiflora flowers in your landscape because they get so sleepy and drunk on the nectar that you can just walk up and pet the bumblebees, which is a fun activity if you have kids. The other day I was visiting a permaculture property in Waimanalo that had a species I'd never heard of or seen before, with these passion fruits that are the size of my head. And that one is called Passiflora quadrangularis, the giant granadilla, or giant tumbo. It has a lot of names, but it's another Passiflora, another passion fruit on island. It's called Liliko'i, and this is the giant Liliko'i. It's huge. It's as big as a grown man's head. And I did not get to taste test that one, but I'd like to. Hey there, podcast listeners. Just a quick note from the studio. Apparently, the quadrilangaris flesh and skin, when cooked as a vegetable, has even more potential than the actual fruit inside of it, or should I say the pulp inside of it. All of this I've gathered from my brother-in-law, who's way more well-versed in tropical species here in Hawaii. And he basically said that the flavor is kind of like watermelon rind-esque, and there's a number of different ways of cooking it and preparing it, but I am a total fan of pickling watermelon rind, so in the future I'm super excited to pickle some of the quadrilangaris skins, or should I say rinds, after saving the seeds to grow some of my own. And I don't know, my mind is just blown. I'm in this Passiflora world of experience, and I just can't get out of it. So let's continue on in the podcast episode where I was recording things without fully understanding the quadrilangaris flavors. It looks like it has a really thick skin, so I wonder how thick the rind is compared to the interior, how much actual seeds and fruit there really is, because what you're eating is, all these species, what you're eating is the seeds, and you're basically just sucking them dry of the seeds. So yeah, I don't know, that one would be interesting to try out. So yeah, if you're interested in growing this, any sort of Passiflora in your landscape, do your research, because on the East Coast, at least, Passiflora incarnata, it can be somewhat invasive, although I don't like that word, but it can kind of take over your garden and start popping up everywhere. It shoots out underground, really long, sort of like underground stems all over the place that shoot up in areas that you never expected them to, and that can be annoying for people who have very meticulously designed landscapes. Personally, I don't mind it. I put it somewhere where it's under a trellis, and it's going to totally take over the trellis and pop up in places I didn't expect it to pop up, but that's fine, because then you can just cut off the young stalk and propagate it, give it to a friend, or eat the leaves or whatever. So couldn't be the worst. It could be much worse than having such a useful plant that appears in your landscape. And if you're in tropical zones, check out Passiflora laurifolia and Passiflora edulis. They're both wonderful, delicious, just incredible vines that will, if you have a fence or an arbor for them to climb, just really kind of sets the tone for the landscape. So just some notes about the difference between some of these species that we've been talking about. Please excuse the rooster in the background that is so rudely interrupting this podcast. I tried to chase him down and he evaded me, because roosters run much faster than I do. And it's just a thing out here in Hawaii that there's roosters all over the landscape, and they'll wake you up at 4:30 in the morning. And yeah, good stuff. So so talking about some of these different Passiflora species, for the reference, I'm going to be using Ken Fern's Plants for a Future as the basis of all this information. Really great database that you all should check out. So for the Maypop vine, which is Passiflora incarnata, it's hardy, Ken Fern lists it as hardy from zone 7 to 11, but I believe that it's much hardier. I know people who grow it all throughout zone 6, and some occasions it does naturalize in zone 5, although I believe it needs a bit of a warm microclimate in zone 5 to get established. So the medicinal effects is that it's sort of a mild sedative, it's an anxiety reliever, and sort of a sleep aid. It's, tasty and edible in all the ways that we mentioned before. Its habitat is that it likes to grow in sandy thickets and open soils, or by fields, roadsides, fence rows, and thickets, according to Ken Fern. The flowers are really, really astonishing on this plant. They're a deep purple, and there's also a hybrid species that has white flowers. That one's called Passiflora incarnata alba. That one I have had a really hard time getting cuttings or a propagated plant of. There's only a few folks out there who had been growing it and distributing it at their nurseries, and then I believe that maybe it didn't sell well, or people didn't like it as much as just the standard species. I don't know, but it's kind of hard to find. But the standard Passiflora incarnata is this beautiful purple passion flower that grows to be about the size of the palm of your hand, and it's just stunning. I mean, it'll be hard for me to describe it if you don't look up a photo. It's just like this beautiful, beautiful, dark, iridescent purple that is the sort of why Ben, when he made that concoction, turned out to be a purple drink. All the purple seeped out into the water or alcohol of the tincture that you make with this plant for it to use it as a sleep aid, and you end up with this crazy iridescent purple liquid. Really amazing. It prefers well-drained soil, but it'll handle light or medium, heavy clay, sandy loam, and prefers mildly acidic soil. It prefers a moist but well-drained soil, which is what every plant prefers. I found that it'll grow in a variety of places, in wet spots and dry spots, and it'll take over in moist meadows, wet meadows. It'll really spread it so long as it's sunny, and it is somewhat shade tolerant as well. In my experience, it's not not really a heavy shade kind of plant, but light, medium shade, dappled shade, it'll thrive. People make jellies and jams out of it more often in the South, I feel like, where these things grow everywhere. In the southeastern United States, it's a lot more common to find just growing along roadsides as compared to the Northeast, where the only time you're really going to find it is at a botanical garden or something similar. The native range for Passiflora incarnata is eastern North America, Virginia, Kentucky, down to Florida, and even out west closer to Texas. For Passiflora edulis, its USDA hardness is from zones 9 to 12. Its native range is more closer to South America, Brazil, Paraguay, northern Argentina. It's not used as a medicinal plant nearly as much as Passiflora incarnata is, but it's really, the flavor of the pulp of the fruit is so much more intense than Passiflora incarnata that it's sought after for that reason. And this is the one that's grown commercially more often, and according to Ken Fern, it's grown commercially in Australia and New Zealand, which is very cool. It's also, the flavor of this specific fruit is what you'll find in... Oh, wow. It's really loud here because the bamboo is all bumping up against each other with this giant gust of winds that come by. I apologize that my recording studio is a jungle right now, but this is just the situation that we're in. It's funny because I've never seen bamboo where it's like the young shoot of a bamboo that's 30 feet tall, but it looks like a giant stalk of asparagus. The top of it is just like this asparagus head that is really kind of wild. the painted bamboo kind of zone that I'm in right now. It's all technically an edible bamboo species, but it's just a little bit bitter. And around it, there's just this pothos, which out here is considered to be annoying and invasive, and it grows everywhere. Which on the East Coast, people pay like $30 for a small plant at your local nursery for. There's beautiful variegation on these leaves, but this pothos is just totally taking over the forest and growing everywhere, growing up all the bamboo, and it's really beautiful. It's really nice, but in terms of having a forest garden, it's not the most ideal. Okay, we're going to go back to the Passiflora because the bamboo is now settled down and it's not making as many noises. So back to Passiflora, the Jamaican Liliko'i, Passiflora laurifolia, also called the yellow granadilla. This one has a USDA hardness of 10 to 12, and apparently its leaves are poisonous. So completely, this is why you have to be careful in this species, is that Passiflora incarnata is it seems like everything about it is edible, but that's not always the case. Every species is a little bit different. Some of the flowers are, one species will have edible fruit, but the flowers are not edible, and the leaves are not edible, etc. Its native range is South America, Brazil, Peru, Venezuela, the Guyanas, and into the Caribbean. Probably why it's called the Jamaican Liliko'i. At least that's what it's called here. The fruit that it produces apparently have really high vitamin C content, and its other common names are apparently water lemon and the orange Liliko'i, which, I know it as the Jamaican Liliko'i. So I think the common names are really will change no matter where you are. And once again, it has a similar sort of, it wants to grow in some of the same places that all other Liliko'i species do, but seems pretty tolerant of a variety of soil types and shade conditions, climbing up to find the sun on your native trees or whatever you have on your landscape. Okay, so guys, the last species that I want to talk about today is also another tropical species that I just was introduced to the other day out here in Hawaii, and it's called the giant Liliko'i or the giant granadilla. Every culture has a different name for it, but it's Passiflora quadrilangaris, and this is the largest passion fruit in the entire genus. It's like the size, the ones I saw the other day were as big as my head, and I have a pretty big head. It was also as big as my brother's baby. It's almost, it's like almost a football-sized fruit. Looks like a melon, but it's in the passion fruit family. And it also kind of has the same sort of properties as a melon, except with a melon, you often don't eat the seeds, like if you have a cantaloupe or something or whatever, but you cut this guy in half and it's got a huge, really thick rind, and the rind itself is edible, and you can make jams and stuff out of the rind. You can also just cook the rind or bake it, and there's all different ways of preparing it. It seems like that's kind of the thing that people really like about this one is maybe the rind more than the pulp itself, but the pulp is also edible. I can't comment on the taste of the pulp because I didn't get a chance to try it, but it does look like a pretty freaking epic fruit to be growing in your food forest, because whereas every other species of Liliko'i or of passion fruit that I've encountered, it fits in your hand, basically. It's like, fits on the palm of your hand, but this is something that's, 7, 8, or 9 inches tall and 5 or 6 inches wide that you can barely hold on to, kind of. Really, really cool species. And in terms of, it's also, it's a tropical, so it's one of the other tropical ones. Its USDA hardness is 10 to 12. It's found in a lot of the same places in natural habitats like floodplains or in rainforests all across the world, really. It doesn't have a native range that is really well known, which is interesting. It's one of those sort of mystery, its origins are unknown. I'm very excited to get to taste it. Hopefully on this trip. If not on this trip, then a future adventure visiting my family out here. And just yesterday, I seeded out a bunch of these different varieties of passion fruit that we've been talking about in this episode into little grow pots. And if you're interested, the way that you do that, the way that you save seed from all these different species of passion fruit, is that all the seeds, like when you dig in, you bite into a Liliko'i. There's the juice of the Liliko'i, which you immediately suck out because that's the best. It's so good. And then there's all these little seeds and little seed pods, and that's usually what you suck on and you swallow, or you could crunch them. You can munch on them and crunch on them a little bit. But the seeds are edible. But if you want to plant them, you have to separate the seeds from the seed pod, the little gelatinous coating around it. And so to do that, there's a few different ways you can do it. I mean, you can put it in a plastic bag and with water and just kind of like really thumb away all of the coatings. What I decided to do, which is maybe not the best method, is to, just kind of get it in my mouth and with my teeth, take off all the little coatings, like one by one, and then just spit it out directly into the pot, which was an interesting sort of meditative experience, but maybe not the most time efficient. But basically, you got to separate the pod from the seed if you want to grow it from seed. And in terms of germination, I mean, it's probably something like a 50% germination rate. So I was putting 2 or 3 seeds per little cell. You'd be surprised at how many seeds can be in one fruit to replicate and to grow. And then those will probably be planted around my brother's forest garden at the bases of trees, where they'll have some compost planted around them to give them the sort of nutrient boost to climb all the way up the tree until they hit canopy where they can get some sun. And that's something that's really cool about it. It's a vine that is not going to totally kill or, just strangle your trees. It's going to sort of live in harmony with them and reach to the top of the canopy and get that sun and then drop amazing fruit off of what already could be a fruit tree in your landscape. So in terms of designing vertically in food forests, it's a really, really great candidate for that. Just a note about that method of planting at the bases of trees in the forest garden. Planting, you're always kind of running the gambit when you plant vines to grow up established trees. And Liliko'i is definitely one that can get to the top of the tree and then really take over a canopy area, not letting light in for the trees below it, which of course is going to mess with yields of other plants and maybe not be the best thing for you. But the important thing to note is that the vines of the passion fruit out here in the tropics, and also this is kind of true of some of the cold hardy species too, but those will die back to the ground. But basically the vine doesn't get so thick and crazy that it strangles your tree, which is what really the important thing is. Whereas right now I'm looking at 2 other species just like that pothos, and there's a different vine that I don't know the name of that will just really sucker on to your coconut palm or whatever and just create a really bad situation with this really thick as your wrist woody vine or vegetative vine that can cause some serious problems in the long run. So yeah, the whole vining up the trees idea is always kind of a concept in permaculture that is maybe not the best in every application. You really have to be wary of what you're doing, and maybe if you have a isolated tree in the landscape that isn't providing any other sources of food, then that could be, you could use it as a trellis. But it's also possible that anytime that you send a vine up a tree, it's not going to be the tree isn't going to be super happy about it. It just depends on what you get out of it and whether or not you're also providing ecosystem services for other species like birds and, whatever you've got going on in your ecosystem. So just something to consider that, the vining up the tree idea comes with an asterisk next to it for sure. Something that's pretty common out here, and one of my favorite treats is Liliko'i butter or Liliko'i jelly. So Liliko'i butter is just taking the seeds or the pulp of the Liliko'i fruit and mixing it in with just, your store-bought butter, or maybe homemade butter if you're really badass, but probably more often store-bought. And then the flavors just intermingle in this amazing, super delicious concoction that you can spread on your bagel or your fresh bread for a breakfast treat. And oh my God, it's so good. Liliko'i jelly is a little bit different. That's, there's no butter in it, obviously, and so it's a little less melt in your mouth, but still really, really tasty and pretty common to find at gift shops and other stores in Hawaii on the islands. Maybe something to order or to check out because the flavors are really unique, and that might be a way for somebody who's never tried Passiflora listening to sort of get an idea of what the flavor of the fruit tastes like. Really, really special, really unique, really sort of sweet and a little tangy, a little sour. And for the most part, that's going to be Passiflora edulis that those sort of concoctions are made with. But yeah, check it out. If you've never had it, I hope that you guys have an opportunity to taste some of what we've covered today in this episode. So yeah, thanks for sticking with us, and see you next time, everybody.